Okay, so we're talking about APL plus WPF. So the first question most people would have is, well, they're acronyms. What do they mean? We all know what APL means. That's, that's fine. But what's WPF? Windows Presentation Foundation. Okay, so what's Windows Presentation Foundation? A few years ago, Microsoft decided that they didn't have enough technologies for putting pictures on screens, basically. So they'd invent another one. So one of the main differences between this one and all that went before it is this thing tries to combine all the strengths of a web browser, a Windows Forms type application, so the sort of thing you can do with Quad WC, and various other types of multimedia presentations, and basically anything that is concerned with putting things on the screen. Okay, sorry, you'll have to excuse my voice. It's been a long week already, especially last night. Excuse me. Yeah. So anyway, obviously we can call WPF stuff from APL, otherwise it would be a very short talk. So we'll start with some code. Basically, we've got a couple of little utility functions which are in the namespace which you can find on the key disk. So all these samples, not the slides, but all the samples are on the key disk. Any questions about them, anything that's not obvious, just contact me, find me later on. Okay, so we set up the quad using, create a new label. Well, a label is just a piece of text. Give it some content, create a new window, title the window, put the content, turn the content of the window into the label, so stick the label into the window, and show it. And then we get something beautiful like this little dialog box in the corner. So not very much code, but still, a little bit of a handful.
We haven't used the WPF.
Yeah, that is all WPF. All of that is using WPF. Sorry, I will get used to this pointer in a minute. WPF is a .NET class system, and it requires the .NET Framework version 3. So setting the quad using is where it all gets loaded up, and that brings into scope a bunch of classes like label and window. So label is a WPF class. Window is also a WPF class. Okay? No quote marks on those because, yeah. On the label on there, no. No, okay. WPF.using is just a variable in the WPF namespace that has all of the contents of quad using needs. So this is just to keep my quad usings tidy. I bury them all in a little variable somewhere, and then when I want to use WPF, assign them into the quad using, which is always localized. This is just my style. Okay, so when they were introducing this WPF stuff, they thought, well, okay, writing code is fine, but sometimes there's these other people called designers who like to get in on the act. Now, traditionally, when you've got a designer on the job, they'll go into some nice graphics package and draw a pretty picture, hand it over to some poor developer and say, implement that. And the developer will bash his head against the desk and implement something that's about as close as you can get. So Microsoft had the really good idea of, if we set up this system in such a way that the designers can use tools that can produce the forms themselves that the code that can then interact with, then that saves the developers bashing their heads on the desk quite as much, trying to implement stuff which will never work. Okay? So they came up with this idea called XAML, which is XML that represents classes that are defined in this case, WPF. Doesn't have to be WPF, it is general, but for the sake of this demo, we'll just use WPF. So we have a little piece of XAML just in a variable, which says create a window with a title. Then you have to just import the namespace. That's not very interesting, that's just boilerplate. Put a label on, hello from XAML, and that's the window. And then this is a little APL function, which again is on the workspace. Load it up, have a look. It's about 2 or 3 lines of very boring code that takes that XAML, calls a couple of utility functions, and turns it into a window. Okay? So XML is great for tools to use rather than humans. Well, it's quite handy for humans as well, but it's very, very handy for tools, so we'll get back to that in a minute. Now, you can mix the two approaches. This slide's getting a bit busy, but if we have a window, we define the most of the stuff in some XAML up here. So we defined the window, we defined a label, but then we want some code. So this is a little function. Again, it's on the memory stick. Load the window from the XAML, creates the window. Find name label just says find me the instance of the thing that has the name label. Okay, and then we can attack it we can attack it in the code. We can change any of its properties. So in this case, we can just put the date in from QuadDS onto the label, and then we can show the dialog. Oftentimes, you'll want a handler on a button or something like that. Okay. Now, these forms, like I said, can be put together in tools. Now, this is Visual Studio, which you may have, or if not, you can get a free version called Visual Studio Express, which has got quite a good little designer in it for just laying out the forms in XAML. And if you edit the XAML, you get autocomplete. So it's quite handy. Sorry about the bad colours on there. It's quite handy for if you just download a copy of the free version of that, create a new XAML file and use that to edit it, then load it up from your APL. And then you don't have to learn C#, which is handy. But you might as well use the tools because you will have to learn XAML, really, if you want to use WPF for much. There are also more fancy design-friendly tools. This is part of the Expression suite, which Microsoft released earlier this year. And then that's got all the sorts of normal drawing tools that graphics designers like. And again, it uses XAML. So in this case, we've got some fairly complicated little drawings and quite a lot of XAML. So when you start getting into complicated artwork and complicated forms, then the tools do make life a lot easier. Okay, so like I said before, WPF makes it easy to make a number of different styles of application. So if you want to remake the Windows calculator, you can do that using QuadWC. It's a QuadWC Windows Forms type classic application, just buttons and edit boxes and radio boxes and things. Nice and simple. But if you want to make WordPad, you don't actually get much help with QuadWC. Basically, you're okay with the buttons and the menus, but doing all of this actual document stuff is really quite hard, tedious, very tedious, and best avoided. And if you want to write a web browser, now, okay, you can bury the Microsoft web browser inside, but controlling all the links and things in an application. So say you weren't wanting to browse the web, but you were wanting to use the same model for navigation through your application. That's, again, quite tricky to get working well without something like WPF. And if you wanted to redo Windows Media Player, then, yeah, don't. It's far too hard because you want it to look nice. So that means you would have to draw all of these little buttons by hand. You'd have to do all the gradients and things, and then you'd have to do all the media codecs, and it's just not worth the effort. So WPF makes it really very easy to do all of these 3 styles of application. Excuse me. Because it was designed from the ground up to include all of the bits that you could possibly need in one integrated framework. So rather than having completely separate applications, you could have, say, hyperlinks in this guy, or you could have media playing when you press square root in there. You could have a video came up in the button or something exciting and strange like that. You can do artwork, you can do 2D artwork, you can even do 3D artwork. But when you get onto 3D artwork, you really do want to find a good tool, because unfortunately, at the moment, the only primitive shape that WPF supports is a triangle in 3D. In 2D, you've got circles and Bezier curves and lines and boxes and lots of useful, helpful things. But in 3D, you've only got lots and lots and lots of little triangles. So if you actually want to do any 3D work, you do need a 3D XAML design tool. But that's all right. At least you can do it. A bit more interesting for most of the application that you guys tend to write is the layout control options. Now, in the classic world of GUI design, you have to put each little control exactly where you want it. In pixels, which is a bit of a problem, basically, because you've got to find it, figure out where it goes, and then if the user changes to high DPI settings, so changes from 96 dots per inch to 100 dots per inch, then all of your form goes wrong, because it scales, but you specified all the fonts in points. And Windows knows that a 72-point font should be an inch, and it knows what the DPI is, so it scales it appropriately. So what you tend to find happens in most applications when you turn high DPI settings on in Windows is all of the dialog box shrinks and the text stays the same size, which isn't good, because all the buttons get smaller and their labels run off the end. So in WPF, we can still exactly position things, but they're in what's called device-independent points. So it's a notional 96 DPI, and WPF will check with Windows what the actual dots per inch of the display device, now be that a printer or the display, is, and then it will do all of the adjustments for you automatically, which is very helpful. So anyway, we can position controls in the same places we want them. We could also use a number of different layouts. So in this one, we can have a flow panel, which you just say, I want a flow panel, I want to put a button in it, another button, another button, another button, another button, and it will flow them left to right, top to bottom, or top to bottom, left to right, depending on how you set it. You can have a stack panel, where it will just put them one after the other, and again, you can go horizontally. Now, one thing to note is that the layout engine will negotiate with the controls to figure out how big they need to be. So all the controls know what their minimum size is, what their maximum size is, and the layout engine knows how big the window is. So it will almost always get a really good layout with almost no code. You can also do a grid type layout with things covering multiple columns, multiple rows. And the final type, which is actually, I find the most useful, is you can have a dock layout which says, I want this guy to be stuck to the top of my form, I want this guy to be stuck to the left, and I want this guy to fill the rest of the space. So you'd often have, say, a menu bar or a toolbar up there, some sort of directory navigation there, and then your actual data in the middle. Now, one of the key things about WPF is the whole thing is designed to be composable. So you can put anything in anything. And then you can put anything in that, and that, and that, to whatever level of nesting you want. So you can combine these layout styles. So in this one, we've got the grid layout is the dock layout is orange. And then in the top bar, we've got a little button bar, which will be a flow layout. And then we have some interesting data visualization stuff going on here with a grid layout. So mix and match. So basically, the easiest way to do this is draw a quick picture of what you want, and then just start drawing breaks and lines on it, and you'll very quickly learn to see, oh, that's a flow layout, that little bit there, and how to compose them. Okay, getting on to some real applications. That's the castle just down the road, well worth a visit if you haven't seen it already. Now, this is just a quick photo view, and now the pictures and everything are on your key disk as well. So we've got a list box on the left-hand side, and we've got an image on the right-hand side, and as you move up and down the list, as you'd expect, the picture changes. Very nice. And this is very few lines of code, as you'll see when you crack it open later on. So that's quite useful. But what if we wanted, rather than having a traditional list box here, what if we wanted thumbnail previews or something like that? It's going to make it a bit more pretty. So something like that. It's completely trivial. All you do is add a little bit of XAML that says, on this list box, rather than displaying strings of strings, display them like this. And in this case, like this is open the file rather than displaying the string, and then display that bitmap. So like I say, you can compose everything. So this guy here looks completely different to that guy, but actually it's still a list box. So all of the same properties work. The current item, moving around, all the same events. Nothing has changed as far as the developer is concerned. The only thing that has changed is what that looks like. So this means that you can radically change the look of your application as long as you don't change the structure of your application. You can radically change the user interface from code pretty much at any point you want without having to cause a lot of extra work. Sorry, I only got five minutes, so I'll rush. Okay, yeah, just a slightly mad example of nesting. Like I said, you can put anything in anything. So we'll start off with a button here. We'll put a stack panel in a button, stack panel being a layout control. Then we can put a label inside the button, which we've got here. And then we can put an edit box inside the button. Why you'd want to, I still haven't decided, but you know, you can put an edit box inside a button. And it works. And that is a real edit box, and that is a real button. You can click on the button and you can edit the text in the edit box. I mean, if anyone can actually think of a use for that, please tell me, because I can't. But the point being, you can put anything in anything in anything. You could put a video in there. You could put a preview of a Word document or something in there, and then zoom in and edit the document. It all just works. A slightly more traditional example, you can put a bitmap behind, or anything else, in fact, behind some text, to use that to colour the text in. So that's just the APL to do that. I'll skim past that. The thing that I really like about this system is it's got a better typography engine, in some ways even than Word, which is pretty good. And if you're doing data for layout, particularly reports and things, typography is quite important. So it's all based around something called a flow document. Look that up on Google. We haven't really got time to go into that now. But a flow document with a bunch of paragraphs in and a gratuitous RainPro chart, because all my demos will always include at least one RainPro chart. So we create this flow document, throw it up in a flow document reader, and it paginates the document, lays it out, makes it easy to read on the screen. Does some really nice stuff with the fonts. If you tell it to use all of the optional ligatures, then even pretty things like that little Q work. Now, if you run that, put that same sentence into Word, this is Palatino linotype. It doesn't look as pretty as this. This is using all of the optional bits that the font guys have included in the font. So that looks quite nice. If you zoom out, or you've got a big monitor, and you want to read the whole thing, it will repaginate and retabulate the document into columns to keep it nice and readable, because if you end up with a really big monitor with text that goes all the way across, that's very hard to read. So it becomes very easy to present a report to your user that he can then move around, navigate. It's even got search in there, full text search, which comes for free, absolutely no code required from us. This is good. I like no code required from me, because I've got plenty of code to write anyway. The paging, completely free. And over here we've got a bunch of different options for how we display it. We could display it in two-page sort of side-by-side mode, or we can display it a bit like a traditional web page, just in scroll mode. And we can zoom in and out. And all of that is completely free. So, yeah. The printing, it takes a couple of lines of code to actually send it to the printer, but all of the type, layout, everything, you don't need to change your layout. You can, yeah, I mean, this is a problem in the old world, is if you've got a dialog box window that you want to print, and you've specified everything as points, you print it, it looks great on your 96 dpi monitor, and then you print it on your 1200 dpi screen, it's tiny, you can't read a thing. WPF will scale everything and use the highest resolution it can on the device. Yeah. I'm not on the payroll of Microsoft. I do use their tools. I do like some of their tools, but not all of them. And anyway, you all know how good Dyalog is. I don't need to sell Dyalog to you guys at all. Yeah. So there's two technologies in here. One Dyalog technology, one Microsoft technology. So I'll talk about the one you don't know about. So anyway, yeah. Which GUI toolkit should I use? Now, okay. There's a few options here. We've got Causeway Pro. Now, I was on Causeway's payroll, just to, before I say that it's really good, which it is, and is well worth a look. And QuadWC. Now, if you're doing sort of data entry forms or traditional style apps, or you want to do something that's cross-platform, those are much better technologies to use. The Causeway Pro and QuadWC are much better technologies to use than WPF. Don't use that. They're simple. They only require APL. You don't need to go and research them. Easy. Another option would be WinForms, which is .NET, so you might need to do a bit more reading around. Still very much your typical data entry applications are the best things for doing in that, but you get a slightly more modern look and feel. So it has its uses. And then WPF, it needs Windows XP or later. That can be a problem for some people. It needs .NET Framework 3. That can be a problem for some things. But that's the costs. It's very easy to use. And it does separate the look of the application from the behavior of the application, which can reduce your maintenance costs quite a lot as well. It's good, very good for multimedia and graphics, and the flexible layout is very good. The typography is excellent. That's almost worth having to install .NET Framework 3 for, just for the typography in my book. But then I get fussy about such things. So there are a number of different trade-offs, and WPF is not ideal for everything. It's just something to be aware of, so that you know, this one can be used. Oh, this application might be a good one. Talk to Jonathan. See if he can give you any hints. Drop me an email, jonathan@dyalog.com, and I can help you out on that. Where to find out more information? msdn.microsoft.com. Microsoft.com/expression, which is some of the tools I showed you, or Google, obviously. Font of all wisdom is Google. Even Wikipedia has entries about WPF, and there's plenty of books available on Amazon or your favorite bookshop. Or, like I said, email jonathan@dyalog.com, and I'll do my best to help you understand anything that you need to. So, it is coffee time, but if there's any questions that you want first, yeah? You can integrate a bit. It's possible to put stuff on, say, a QuadWC form, but that's tricky. It's not easy. So you can integrate things into your application, but generally I wouldn't recommend mixing things on one window. Okay. Yep. No, you'd have to write that. Yes, but not really with APL. WPF, you can write some XAML and load that up in your web browser, and as long as there's no application codes behind, then that will just work. If you write a bit of C# code behind the form, then there is a way of compiling that so that you can load that up in a browser. Silverlight uses something that's very like WPF, so you can use it over the web. But again, those are best supported by languages like C# and Visual Basic, and not very well supported by APL at the moment. There's a few things we don't do on our .NET interfaces that make that hard. Okay? Yeah. Any more? Yeah? Well, XP and Vista. You have to have both. .NET 3 shipped not very long ago. XP shipped many moons ago. So you have to install. I think the Framework 3 does ship with Vista, but if you don't want to upgrade to Vista. Well, it's .NET Framework 2 with a few knobs stuck on the side, basically. The core engine is the same, but there's a lot more utility classes. So, yeah. Sorry? Yeah, I think so. Any? And version 2. Yeah, version 3. Well, anything later than 3 will be fine. So when they release version 4 next year, that will work as well. So, and also you can consider new operating systems than XP because it is getting a bit old now. Code, APL, yeah. Basically, you can do the same things in either. Apart from if you actually want to handle things like events, like mouse clicks or whatever, you need to do that in code. But you can design the whole form and then just wire up the events. So there's an example of that on the memory stick. There's a little application with an edit box and a button. When you click the button, it calls off to APL, which runs a little function that rotates the contents of the edit box. Not very exciting, but it shows how to wire the two up together. Okay, any more? In that case, I think it's coffee time, and I think we're back at 1:30 or 1:15. 1:15. Okay.